welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very informative show coming right up with special guest Dr. Adam Cox. And he's here to talk with us about his new book, Cracking the Boy Code. Now, Dr. Cox is a clinical psychologist whose work includes thousands of hours interviewing children in schools across the U.S., UK, Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore. As a highly sought-after therapist and frequent speaker on the psychology of boys, he is also the author of acclaimed books titled The Purpose Before 20, Boys of a Few Words, and No Mind Left Behind. So let's welcome to the show Dr. Adam Cox.
Thanks very much.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. And my goodness, what a profound book. I think a lot of parents are going, how do I talk to my son? And your book really has a great way of just having people understand more of what's going on.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And it's been a lifelong passion for me. I've spent almost 25 years of my career on this particular challenge, and I certainly know how important it is for parents, families, and schools to make contact with boys.
So what inspired you to follow this life path? What's the whole inspiration behind this and the book?
Well, interestingly enough, Marianne, years ago, I was an artist in New York City, and my parents had raised me to be an artist, and I had a storefront, and I noticed that the kids on the street were looking in at me doing my artwork all day long, and I decided to have them come into my studio, and I began teaching them how to paint and draw. In a very short period of time, I had kind of a complete change of direction in my life, and I decided that my calling was really to work with young people, to work with kids, and I went back to graduate school and dedicated myself to becoming a psychologist.
Oh, my goodness. How inspiring is that? I'm sure you picked up a lot of things because it seems like you have all these young people who are so open to you that they're coming and being creative, in a space with you.
Yeah, it was just an amazing kind of experience, and obviously kids really just loved the attention, being taught to do something. And I was, there in a particular neighborhood in New York City where kids were really needing some supervision and some direction, and so they were very eager for, any kind of adult attention, and so it was just a wonderful experience, and it's ever since that time, it's been, no looking back, and I've just spent my life very happily so working with kids.
Well, and at what point did you decide, I'm going to start writing this book because there's so many other people that maybe just need help in this area?
Well, I have been, writing about boys and their social and emotional challenges for, a good 15 years or so. And so this has been a long-term interest for me, but I have been very fortunate in my work to travel to hundreds and hundreds of schools, giving talks about educating and raising boys, talking to both parents and teachers. And part of that work, I spent 2 years doing a global research study, talking to boys around the world about how they find a sense of significance and purpose in their life. And so I wanted to write this book that is divided into two parts, which really focus on the two central themes. One is, what are the technical strategies for communicating with boys? What allows them to open up? What makes them feel comfortable? What gets them energized about talking to adults? And secondly, what are the big themes in boys' lives? Because I think that in some way we have missed the boat on boys over the last 15 years because we have talked relentlessly about their pathologies, the things that are wrong with them. So, for example, we talk all the time about boys in video gaming, or we talk about their disinterest in school, or their involvement in bullying, or other inappropriate online activities. We focus on those things to such a great extent that we have forgotten to talk about the prospective strengths of boys, the things that they do well, and how to bring forward those kind of positive attributes. So that is a very important aspect of my book, is to focus on things like their authenticity and helping them find a sense of purpose through different types of work. But before we can do that, we have to learn how to set the table with boys, which means bringing a very constructive and effective tone to conversation.
I was so impressed with your book because there are so many examples that you give of, if young boys are acting a certain way, or maybe just not really engaging is kind of more the word I'm looking for, how to encompass them in a conversation in the correct way.
Yeah, that's really the case, because so often what boys are thinking is that, okay, they may be thinking, well, what have I done wrong now? That's often the case when if this is a serious conversation, I must have done something wrong. So we have to learn to get past kind of an interrogation style of communication where we're always kind of pushing at something that a mistake that might have been made, or causing boys inadvertently to feel very vulnerable. The most important thing that we adults can do in terms of helping boys to feel more comfortable in a conversation and to be more willing to open up is we minimize their feelings of vulnerability, because that is how they feel. And for example, Marianne, one of the places where they feel most vulnerable is when we sit them down at the kitchen table, look deep into their eyes, and start to ask very personal questions. And we often do that, and that I think is happening in lots of families, and that is like one of the worst spots for kids. They feel like, oh no, here we go. And they can't think. When we're that close to them, when we're looking that deeply into their eyes, they struggle to know what to say, and sometimes we think they're withholding when really they just feel, so tense and anxious in that situation, they don't know how to respond.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of people anxious. You're sitting there, and depending on the tone, depending on the tone, it's like, well, the tone means everything.
The tone is critical, and so, in my book, I emphasize what I have called task tone, which on the surface might seem really, straightforward and simple, because essentially what I'm talking about is just talking without a lot of emotion in your voice, and I'm talking in a way that is very matter of fact, very, in some ways, a little bit directive and to the point, because this sort of communication connects very well with boys. It feels at least somewhat respectful and serious, and it also feels more kind of logical, and so it appeals to the processing differences of boys. We have to kind of understand that one of the key gender differences that we're working with when we're talking with boys is that they tend to process language and ideas over on the left side of their brain, which is where we do kind of more of our logical thinking. So, for example, if somebody says to you, "My dog died last week," if you're thinking over there on the left side of your brain, you hear the facts. You had a dog. This dog died. This happened last week. Just the facts, ma'am. But over on the right side of your brain is where you would notice the facial expression of the person that just said that, how they move their eyes. You would notice the pitch and the rhythm and the tone of their voice. And so you have all of your social perceptual skills over there on the right side of your brain, and we have a whole generation of kids, because of electronics and because of some other issues as well, that really struggle to use that right side of their brain to kind of do some perceptual processing. So they miss a lot of cues. They miss a lot of the frequencies of communication. And so when I recommend this task tone, in a way what I'm saying is, let us communicate in a way that goes right to the center of boys' processing capabilities and makes it easier for them to really hear the content of what we're trying to say.
That's so important, because, it's all about what they hear. And you talk about that in your book so brilliantly, because a lot of people aren't putting that together. It's how boys hear.
Yeah, it's that, if we, just as a rule for your listeners, if we want to, use the best kind of, strategies, and you want to have just like, shorthand for what it is that we should be doing. We, number one, use vocabulary that is very familiar, because vocabulary that is familiar just increases their confidence. It minimizes their anxiety and sense of vulnerability. Use phrasing that is non-judgmental. Sometimes we don't think we're being judgmental, but even the way that we ask a question, the subtext is, okay, you've done something wrong, or was that really the right thing to do, and that sort of thing. And then thirdly, use a tone that is matter of fact, as I was describing a moment ago. So those kinds of ways of communicating are the best guidelines for getting through to boys, and they will reliably help us if we do some other things like avoid too much eye contact. So, for example, when I was giving the example of sitting down at the kitchen table, one of the worst things about that scenario is that you are looking directly into the eyes of someone, and I think that some of the very best conversations with boys occur when parents and kids are driving. And I think many parents have learned this intuitively. I think that they know this, but if you haven't tried this, or you have a very young son and you're going to begin having kind of more serious conversations, when you're driving together in a car, you're both looking out the windshield, so you minimize the eye contact. And also there's something about the motion of the car that just kind of eases and relaxes people, and it makes it easier to talk about more difficult or complex subjects. It just kind of gives you a little bit of momentum. In my office, for many years, I have just tossed a ball. I get kids who come to me all the time because of the books that I've written who struggle with social communication. And you can imagine the last place that a boy with social communication challenges wants to go, and it's to see someone like me. And so I know that, and when they come into my office, I often just immediately pick up a ball and just start tossing it back and forth, because then we both have to look at the ball in order to catch it, so we minimize eye contact, and I have found that that's effective. Sometimes I bring kids outside and have them do something, a little bit of physical work with me, and that kind of also is a nice way to begin breaking the ice. If parents take a walk with kids, you walk the dog, you play even a board game, anything that's kind of physical makes it easier to get some momentum going in a conversation.
And is that a good tip also for parents if they want to start developing better listening skills, is to use these different areas, to have these conversations and get conversations going where they can kind of listen, to really listen what's happening?
Well, this is a great point. And so, one of the things, a couple of things along those lines. One is that when we're having conversations with kids, of course, we don't want it to be like 20 questions. We don't want to be asking, all of the questions and then them giving, like a one-word answer. Sometimes that is how we get a conversation going. And, simple conversations about food, for example. I've known boys love to talk about food, and they're highly invested in their favorite foods and which foods are better. And when I really get pressed and all else fails, I will ask lots of questions about something that I think they know a lot about, and will at least get them used to responding and the sound of their voice being more kind of present in the conversation. So I think whenever we want to get a great conversation going, if we start with the things that, are easier for them to respond about, sometimes what we call a forced choice question. Parents often ask too many open-ended questions, the questions that require more complicated processing and a more complicated response. They might say, for example, something like, so what makes you like this particular person so well? And boys don't really think in those terms, very often. That's a hard question for them to understand. There are two kinds of communication in the world. There's instrumental communication, where we just try to get an answer. We say, something like, pass the milk. Can I have $20? You going to eat all them fries, right? Boys know how to make those statements and ask those questions to kind of get a precise answer, but it's the social communication that is more difficult for boys. But when we want to get conversations going, asking about things that they have a lot of expertise about really works well. So, in the context of my clinical work with boys, I'm often asking about all kinds of things. It could be about their favorite sport. It could be about, it could be about plumbing. I get kids who know a whole lot about things like plumbing or how houses are built or how fishing is done or any particular thing. It could be about their place of faith. It could be about some person in their family or about their school or about their class, anything that they have a lot of information about which they like to opine so that we just get used to the sound of their voice and in part of them leading the conversation.
Yeah, maybe that conversation forward. Well, and you talk a lot in your book about nonverbal communication. I'd love for you to expand on that for us and how this impacts, and works with young boys.
So, most people have heard that nonverbal communication accounts for, the greatest proportion of communication between people. And of course, that's absolutely true. And sometimes we think of nonverbal communication as being, body language and facial expressions and gestures, and that's true as well. Those are all important aspects of nonverbal communication. But nonverbal communication is also what we call the prosody of speech. And these are the qualities that affect the sound of your speech. For example, how fast you talk, the pitch of your voice, the rhythm and cadence of your speech. And those nonverbal cues are how people figure out what your attitude is at a particular time, what you're thinking, what the purpose of your question or statement might be. And for sure, boys are paying very close attention to those kinds of nonverbal cues. And so that's why I emphasize this concept of task tone so strongly, is that it is so important to be very sure that, your tone is putting you in the right light with respect to kids. And, when I'm talking about this, Marianne, I am not talking about being like a drill sergeant. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about having an authoritarian personality where, we're being very harsh, but I am talking about being more matter of fact, more very straightforward, just simply reducing the emotion in your voice, being slightly more directive, asking, sometimes when kids come into my office and I've gotten a call from the school that day and a child has had a very difficult day, they've had a conflict with another student, I know they're upset about it, they're feeling very self-conscious about coming to see me, and so the last thing I want to do is go out into the waiting room and say, oh my gosh, I heard something terrible happen today. That is only going to heighten their anxiety and self-consciousness. So I might go out to the waiting room and I just say, how you doing? I heard there's some things that happened in school today. It's not going to be a problem. Come on in. We're going to talk about it for about an hour. You're going to feel a lot better. And I just have to sit right down. I'll pick up a ball. I'll begin kind of tossing it. And there's something about the matter-of-factness with which that conversation begins that makes boys feel as like, okay, it's going to be okay. In the 2-year global study that I did, sitting with boys in, Africa and Asia and Europe and all over North America, talking to kids about, different kind of life situations, I learned from boys that the thing that they most fear seeing in their parents' eyes is disappointment. That is the thing that they live in fear of, that makes them feel so heartbroken, is that when my parent is disappointed in me, the only thing I can think of is, how can I make this right? What steps do I have to follow to get out of this jam? And so I have tried to communicate this idea to parents over the years that it is so tough on them when they feel like they have disappointed you. If you ask boys about what their greatest fear of the future is, they will tell you that it's getting stuck in a job that doesn't feel like who they are. That's a big existential fear that they have. I don't want to be someone that I am not. If you ask them what their greatest fear is in the present, they will tell you remarkably that I fear that I'm not a worthy son. So when they feel like they have disappointed a parent, it's a very difficult emotional experience for them, and they want to know how to get out of that jam. And so that means, what do I have to do to make things right?
So what are, with that being the main kind of crux and that young boys are facing, what are some ways that parents can encourage them and just help guide them through, because everyone's going to have mistakes and life's difficult situations do arise. How can parents better guide their children, especially young boys, when it comes to stuff like this?
Guide them with respect to managing disappointment?
Yeah, with managing disappointment so they don't feel like they're stuck in that, because I can imagine that would be a really tough place to be.
Well, I think that the main thing is that from a very young age, it's really optimal. It works best if families can just very kind of calmly and matter-of-factly deal with situations that didn't go as planned or a mistake was made, and people just talk about, okay, so, what do we do to kind of correct this here? Because that's what makes boys feel better, is the idea that, okay, we can calmly and just rationally figure this out and take some steps to kind of right the ship. And so I think that having that sort of conversation where we stay away from those strong emotions like disappointment or judgment make it a lot easier for boys to accept the fact that an issue where a mistake has been made is being brought up. So if we get in the habit of having those kind of conversations around the dinner table, for example, that's fine to do that as long as we don't do it in this way that feels like a tribunal or feels like, a terrible mistake was made. Because I think that when boys sense that, okay, there was just, some kind of really terrible moral transgression, something bad really happened, and that the main thing is that I'm supposed to feel guilt, I think that they then of course resist further conversations along those lines. So I think we should try to stay away from trying to instill feelings of guilt and shame and move more toward a sense that, okay, people make mistakes, but there are things that people can do to make amends for those mistakes.
One of the things you mentioned in your book, and I don't have it in front of me, so excuse me if I don't quite get this right, but you had mentioned that young boys will often look, kind of like they have a blank face, when something's going on, yet, their minds are going 100 miles an hour. And I think a lot of people misread that.
Yeah, that's right. And often we think sometimes that boys aren't paying attention to what we're saying if they're not making eye contact. And I make that mistake sometimes as well, and it's often just not the case. They're hearing everything that we're saying. It's just that they're hearing us better when they're not actually making eye contact. So, we should not assume that just because they look a little bit like deer in the headlights or just because they're not making eye contact that they're not paying attention. I think, sometimes we require eye contact at the wrong time, Marianne. And, I think eye contact is a very important thing for children to learn. And in social skills groups, I've often taught boys that we listen with both our eyes and our ears. And so there are certainly times when it's appropriate to make eye contact as a means of showing respect and of just confirming for people that we are paying attention. There are other times at moments of vulnerability, at moments of confusion, when boys don't make eye contact. And they just, that's the last thing that they should do because it just doesn't help them. It causes them to, it makes it more difficult for them to scan their memory for certain kinds of content. There are different kinds of memory that people have. There's long-term memory, but there's also this short-term memory, which in psychology we call working memory. And that is one significant gender difference, is that boys struggle with this kind of short-term memory, this working memory, which is why, for example, ADHD is more prevalent among boys than it is among girls, is that boys have problems with this working memory. And so very often, if they have not committed something to their longer-term memory, they might have been told something just a short while ago, but they can't remember it because it didn't sink in through that kind of short-term memory. So that's a lot of what we're seeing when we see those blank expressions or confusion. Is we're seeing boys struggle with their short-term memory and trying to remember things that might have been said a short while ago, or they know they were supposed to learn, or they have some vague idea, that this was said to them, but now they're really kind of, they're really struggling.
Yeah, kind of having a tough time with that. Well, and you touched on something I'd love for you to expand on, just a little bit ago, in regards to the different types of fears that boys have today versus, future fears. And one is not being in a job or in a position where they feel like they're being authentic. And so what are some of the things that parents and educators can do to help them, with this?
Well, one of the things that we should know, and I think your listeners probably are aware of this, is that we have a current epidemic of anxiety and depression among kids who, by say middle school and certainly high school. So among kids this age, we are seeing just unprecedented levels of anxiety and depression. It used to be 20 years ago in my practice, I hardly ever had kids that needed to go into the hospital because of mental health problems. Today, I suspect that I'm like most practitioners, where rarely does a week go by that a child hasn't gone into the hospital for at least an evaluation, or gone into what we call a partial hospital program for intensive group therapy and so forth. And so, people have asked the question about, where is all this anxiety and depression coming from? A lot of people have speculated that it's because kids have fears about the economy and the future, which made maybe more sense back in 2008 or 2009 when things really looked difficult. But even as the economy has improved, kids still seem to have this, anxiety and depression. And I think that the missing piece in this whole discussion, particularly as it occurs here in North America, is that there is a kind of existential despair among adolescent boys that almost never gets expressed or talked about. They are struggling with a lack of purpose, with a lack of identity, with a lack of usefulness, a lack of role in their community. And in part, this is because we have so relentlessly focused on academic achievement to the exclusion of every other aspect of life. So we expect boys to sit in their chair, pay attention, work their very hardest in school, but we never link that effort and those behaviors to why they're doing that and what is the kind of reward or payoff in life and when does it come, and it just doesn't seem to emerge fast enough for many kids. Kids in our culture are physically growing up as fast as they ever did, and by the time they are 14, 15, or 16, they are physically capable of doing lots of things. And they are physically capable of making significant contributions to their community, to their family, to their school, in whatever realm. But we don't ask kids to do anything that is purposeful or useful like that till much later in life. We just focus relentlessly on academic achievement. Now, it's not that being a good student is a bad thing. Of course, this is a very important and good thing to do. But we have lost a sense of being well-rounded. We have lost some sense of perspective, and I think that kids intuitively know that. And so, this so-called chemical imbalance theory of depression that we use with adolescent kids doesn't get at the origin of the problem. And it's not that, medicines aren't very helpful, because they certainly are. It's just that these depressions and these anxieties that kids are affected by are not coming out of nowhere. They are all coming out of kind of the life path that kids are following, and their strong need to do what I call in my book, Marianne, some type of purposeful work. And this need emerges for kids early in life. This is not something that, we wait until adolescence. One of the great mistakes that we make is thinking that people don't need to think about what their vocation is going to be until they are 16, 17, or 18 years old. They are thinking about these issues much earlier in life. They are making in the back of their mind decisions about what is possible for them much earlier in life. And so we should begin by the time, I am a strong believer that by the time kids are 7 or 8, they should have some type of purposeful work to do in their life. And this isn't just chores. We all do chores to make our families run, to make a classroom run, but work is something that is more individual, it's more expressive, it helps build a sense of identity and a sense of personal value.
Well, on this note, we are going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Adam Cox in regards to his new book, Cracking the Boy Code. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special. When you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Adam Cox, and he's sharing with us his new book, Cracking the Boy Code. So, Dr. Cox, before we left for break, we were talking about just careers and the stress that this puts on young boys.
So many people have been lost for such a long time and trying to figure out, okay, how do we talk to young boys? And then we come to the topic of, what are they going to do for the rest of their lives or living, or at least at some point. And you're right. It seems like if we, address this when they're 16, 17, 18, I'm sure that would cause a lot of stress as opposed to making it something that is kind of part of their growing up.
That's absolutely it, is that, and it's not, for younger boys, it's not so much that they're thinking about a vocation, a career or something, but they are still needing to feel valuable and to feel useful in some way. And often the thing that kids are looking for is to be taught something or to learn something that gives them some special kind of expertise, a little bit more knowledge and skill than most of their peers might have about doing, something along those lines. And so, for example, I consult with lots of schools where boys have problems with some kind of, behavior issue. They're impulsive. Their behavior is dysregulated in school, and they're acting out in some way. And one of the first suggestions that I make to teachers is to give the child a job, because when we give a first, second, or third grader a job in a classroom, in a sense, we're helping that student ally himself with the management team, which is the teacher or perhaps the principal of the school. And so you feel, more inclined to, control yourself and to use good judgment and so forth when you're part of that kind of management team. And the common denominator here, one of the most important things that I can say in this conversation is that we must communicate respect. Respect is the way I think that boys are often looking for, the key affirmation, even love. I think by the time that boys are 11 or 12, they don't doubt that parents love them. They're not sitting, in school or with their friends worrying, do my parents love me? They think, well, that's in the bag. I got that covered. But it's the respect that they're looking for and some sign that we respect them. And one of the ways that we respect them is by giving them serious things to do, by requiring them to do important types of work, to make really important contributions. That's what is the way that we build a kind of great relationship. In my office, I often have 5- and 6-year-old children who seem to be doing things that are just the opposite of what you would do if you wanted respect. They're just acting out. And so I have often had to have hard conversations with parents about, I understand that they have not yet done anything to warrant respect, but if we don't give some respect, then they won't give it back to us. And as a corollary, it's just like if we were walking through an orphanage and children were lying in cribs and they were crying, we would not, look down at the child and say, when you learn to stop crying, I'll pick you up and cuddle you. Of course, we would not do that. We would reach right down and cuddle the child. We would provide comfort and think, well, maybe this is how to help them stop crying. And it is the same to an extent with boys, is that we have to give away the respect. That's why I emphasize this task tone, is that there is a kind of seriousness and an implied respect in using task tone that has a big effect on their psyche, and it just kind of makes them feel differently about their relationship with us than they would otherwise. I don't know if you recall, in the prologue of my book, I wrote a very important story about where I first learned this many years ago. I began running social skills groups with boys, and I was trying my hardest to connect with them and to get them to engage in the group, and it wasn't working. They said very little. When I went out to greet them, they had their arms folded. They were looking at the ground. They had to just drag themselves back to my office, and I almost gave up doing the group because I thought, well, if they don't want to do this, then neither do I, right? That's how kids can often make us feel. If we try very hard to do something and kids reject us, well, we can get kind of very negative and sometimes, get almost fooled into thinking that what we're doing was the wrong idea or that we misunderstood something. But what I learned was one weekend I was home in the days when TNT showed the same movie on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it was the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe playing the character of Maximus. And I'm watching the movie, and there in the opening scene of the movie is Maximus just about to bring his troops into this very deadly battle. And he understands that they're restless and they're edgy and anxious, and they need something to settle themselves down, to galvanize their focus and their capability, and he uses a credo, strength and honor. Strength and honor. And so it kind of ripples down through the troops, and they're all kind of saying strength and honor. And the moment I heard it, it clicked for me that that's what I needed too, is that I wasn't kind of focusing the boys in my group in the way that they needed to be focused around our task, and so they had all these misperceptions about what it is that we were doing. So I went out the very next week, and I extended a fist to the boys in the group, and I had them kind of push their fist against mine, and they said strength and honor, and I said strength and honor, and then we marched back, and everybody was in a different level of emotional energy. I began passing out a shark's tooth amulet to symbolize the boy who had expressed the greatest social courage, and we almost, we interlocked arms, kind of sang some songs together. We did lots of things to kind of reinforce our strength as a group. And I found that by doing this, I was making boys feel about themselves the way that they wanted to feel. And so, of course, they brought much more energy and participation to the group, and that is the secret that parents and teachers everywhere can use is that when we connect boys with their ideal selves, with how they want to feel about themselves, then they are much more full-bodied participant in whatever it is we're doing.
Do you feel that sometimes, I love that story, and thank you for sharing that again with us. And of course, it's in the book, Cracking the Boy Code. That do you feel sometimes parents have unrealistic expectations of their boys?
I think that is true, especially in these days where we're so worried about whether kids are going to be, competitive enough that, we want them to be, just so accomplished in all kinds of different areas. And interestingly, it's not just academically, that we want them to be accomplished, but I think many parents do want their sons to be accomplished socially. So we want them to express confidence in social situations and to easily engage with others and to know the right thing to say. And we just have to understand that a lot of that information, a lot of those things that we think should just be intuitive, that boys should have learned from experience, they don't know. It's not so much that they're withholding, they just don't know those things, and they need lots of practice with those things. So, when we, for example, when I have worked with kids around these skills in groups, I might say, Marianne, okay, let's start our meeting today by every boy in the group just giving a simple compliment to other boys in the group, just a regular compliment like you might give to another student in school during the day. And you'll be surprised how much silence goes on before someone can think of one simple thing to say. And I might get frustrated and say, okay, Dylan, let me start this whole thing off. And I might say, that's a nice shirt you have today. And then I'll say, okay, now you give a compliment to Richard. And he says something like, Richard, I like your pants. And that's how it goes until like all 7 articles of clothing, have been exhausted and nobody can think of anything else to say because they get stuck not knowing what it is that they're supposed to say in a situation. And so what I have often done in a case like that is just typed out 100 basic compliments and have said to boys sometimes, hey, let's fake it till you make it. Just read something from the list. Just get in the habit of hearing your voice give somebody a compliment so it begins to sound more natural. And so when we have those kinds of social expectations for boys, sometimes they need more kind of remedial instruction and kind of, starting from basics than we might expect.
That must be such an empowering experience to have a list, and they're like, because it sounds like they're just searching for the words, like, what am I supposed to say? And to be able to have a list, to go from. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, I can start doing this. This makes it a little easier.
That's the great point that you just made, because it's true that sometimes if we see them struggling, we might think, okay, so he doesn't want to give a compliment, or he's very awkward giving a compliment, and that may not be the case at all. He just can't think of what to say. He's fine with giving a compliment if he knows what to say. So, we have to make sure if someone can't read something from the list because they feel so awkward, then certainly we understand, well, that's what the issue is. But first we need to find out if really what the problem is here is that not enough kind of information flowing through the brain for him to, give a kind of a short statement. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what's appropriate. Heck, I mean, adults have a hard time figuring out what to say sometimes. So, I think we should be able to cut young boys a slack here.
Yeah, I think that's it. And the other thing that's so important when it comes to expectations is that if parents think of themselves as being kind of, in a coaching role with kids, it's much more effective than if they adopt the kind of attitude of a boss. That's the critical distinction, is be a coach and not a boss. And let me kind of explain some of the differences there, is that, first of all, both a coach and a boss can have high expectations. It's not the expectations that are the problem. But the difference is that a coach is someone who is like standing behind you and supporting you, whereas a boss kind of, at least metaphorically, standing in front of you and maybe confronting you, maybe more critical and judgmental than someone who's really kind of thinking of himself, or herself as winning and losing with you, because that's how a coach thinks, right? A coach is like, well, we're all on the same team. We win or lose together. I don't think a boss necessarily thinks like that. And so if parents and teachers and others can remember that it's the tone of your voice that signals whether you are in that kind of coach identity or that boss identity, that'll be really useful, because there's a difference in tone, and most people have to kind of practice that a little bit just to get used to what, that difference is. And so you almost have to kind of hear yourself out loud. I have often said to parents, when you're driving home from work in the car, when you've got some alone time in the car, that's a good time to practice your different voices, because that slightly different tone is like a different place that you're going in terms of your attitude, and it's very useful to have that channel to switch to when you need it.
Well, and this kind of leads me to my next question. Let's say a parent, they purchase your book, Cracking the Boy Code, and they're working it diligently, and they're still feeling like they're stuck or they're having problems communicating or, being able to get their boy to understand what's going on. At what point does either the family or the young boy set up for, like, therapy, some type of therapy session?
Well, okay, so this is a great question too, because unfortunately so many boys come to therapy when something has gone wrong, when there's been a mistake made, when they've gotten into some kind of serious trouble or there's been a serious conflict at home. And I wish that more kids came to therapy when things were going actually relatively well, but when maybe they were struggling with something kind of more personal, such as being more expressive or, working on making more friends or being closer to their friends or looking for some type of purposeful work, as I write about in my book, because those are times then when you can be more reflective and you can be working on these kinds of, broader issues. I think that, with respect to communication, what usually prompts families to bring kids to therapy is when they feel like they've just, hit a stone wall, and that they're searching for a connection and they can't get a connection. They feel like they have been shut out by kids, and that there's just, there's some kind of a problem that they need to have a third-party intervention for. And fair enough, that's true. When we get to, middle school, we get to high school, and you begin just kind of shutting your parent down, that is a time when, you need to have a third party. For younger boys, it's often because they are struggling to regulate themselves. In the world of mental health, we have all these different kinds of disorders, but the main disorder that affects young kids are some type of a disorder of self-regulation, where they, kids are impulsive, or they're unable to control their emotions. They tend to be very reactive, or something like that is going on. So, and I would say also, and this, is something that concerns me, is that in the age of electronics, Marianne, we have all kinds of conflicts that are going on in families that are way beyond anything that people in my field would have imagined 20 years ago. And it's so unfortunate to have to kind of say this, but we are now, living in a time where kids are often having to be hospitalized because of their addiction to electronics, because it is so intense, and that when parents are trying to intervene, such as trying to take a smartphone away or trying to shut down an Xbox, at 9 or 9:30 at night, that there is a physical altercation in the home. That is remarkable to me. But kids, addiction to electronics has become so strong that we are now seeing more and more physical altercations, as a result of parents trying to shut down the electronics. And it's almost like, kids have gone into their own, private mental orbit and have developed their own private sense of rules around when and how they should be able to access these devices. And, of course, that is a huge issue that prompts parents to bring kids into therapy.
What are some of the ways that that's handled?
Well, what is needed at a time like that is a reset. And that's the reason that kids are more frequently going into hospitals, is that families do not know how to do that reset within the context of their normal family life. For example, this is not the kind of thing you can just kind of sit down on the sofa and say, hey, we're concerned about your use of the cell phone and that it's going on too late at night. It's almost like, that doesn't get through. It doesn't kind of penetrate the consciousness of boys. And so, my gosh, it's like and what happens is when kids are going into hospitals are often communicating to the schools that kids go to that they can't use electronics. If they have to use some type of an iPad to do their homework and bring it home, then they're going to have to change schools, because the addiction is that bad that it's like, they can't have just a little bit. It becomes so bad that, there almost has to be kind of like a complete stoppage of all use of electronics, because it's hard to use it for just 20 minutes or an hour and then shut it down. So we have reached that point in our society where we need to have a major reset. I am in favor of, from a young age, introducing kids to other things that I think can be equally stimulating and more socially constructive, like having some type of purposeful work to do. But if we say to kids, okay, you've got 3 hours to just, of leisure time tonight, you have nothing else to do, just go, do whatever. If they get their homework done by 5 o'clock before dinner, then, and there's no supervised time after dinner, then what do we think they're going to do? Of course they're going to turn to electronics, because the electronics are just tons of fun. They are highly stimulating, and, not every child, but a great majority of kids, especially boys, are going to find their recreation in those types of games. So if we don't want them to do that, then there needs to be some other kind of purposeful, structured activity that they can do, other than that. In the back of my book, I have an appendix of, 50 ideas of this type of purposeful work, and I am advocating for things that involve, a little bit more of a commitment or some learning, or something even that could be entrepreneurial, something that could really reflect the creativity and the intelligence of the child, so that it's engaging, it's interesting, because kids are interested in those types of things. Boys love, various initiatives to make money, or to get involved in activities that, involve building something or creating something. But there is so little of that going on. We have basically two things that kids do with their free time. They play sports and they play games. That's it. They play sports and they play games and they go to school. And we have very little that is constructive or purposeful outside of those realms.
Well, and I love the options that you give, because they range from, organize a camping outing with friends to, robotics to, fixing a bike. I mean, you give some options for them to actually do something that will bring them away from the electronics.
Absolutely. And the key there, and this is the difficult thing, and I am so concerned when I make this recommendation, is that I understand that a lot of these activities do require some type of adult supervision, but that's kind of what makes the activity so meaningful and memorable for kids, is that there is some kind of adult supervision, and they have a chance then to do something that becomes kind of part of the family history. And, I think we should have those kinds of, that should be a normal part of childhood for most kids.
Yeah, well, and, I know most parents are busy, but, I mean, a lot of times when people choose to have children or have children, it's because they are wanting to, have a young person that they can help grow in the world. And so this is just part of that.
I love that phrase, to grow in the world, because I have often used the term of bringing children into the world, and by that I don't mean having children, but I mean including them in the broader world of activities that are interesting, and important and ways of being useful. Way back in the early days of the United States, when John Adams began, the colony in Quincy, and there were these communities were essential to survival, there was still kind of a benchmark for who would be included in the community if they wanted to come and be a part of this new place, and it was that you had to be useful in some way. And I think we have really diminished the importance of usefulness, and I think usefulness is a path to humility, and it is a path to feeling a sense of purpose and a bond with your community. And I wish that we focused on those things. We focus relentlessly on, as I said, achievement and accomplishment, and it's not that those things aren't important, but sometimes learning to be useful in being someone that people can rely upon, having some kind of special skill that you can do, something that is connecting you with a world larger than yourself. That is the critical thing, and it's such a path to happiness. When I say this, I don't say this as this is some kind of servitude that boys must serve to prove themselves. Just the opposite. I believe that this is a path to their deeper happiness, their deeper satisfaction with themselves and with their own life. That's why we should pursue these paths of purpose, and not just purpose, but authenticity, learning about themselves, learning a language for describing themselves, because most boys don't know that language. Beginning to develop a sense of a vocabulary for how to describe how you're like and different from other people. These are things that don't necessarily happen in school. In school, we learn about academics, and schools, I think, do a fantastic job with character education. But this search for yourself, for authenticity, and the search for purpose, those are things that parents and communities have to take a stronger role in leading.
Mm. What final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with today?
Well, you've given me an opportunity to talk about some of the most important things, and so I really appreciate that. One thing that I would say is that motivation is one of the big issues that parents around the world are concerned about. Wherever I've gone to give talks, parents are always concerned about how to motivate kids. And I would say that when we ask ourselves, how do we motivate boys, we have to be very clear about what we're asking. Are we truly asking, well, how do we help boys to discover what naturally excites them, what activates their mind, their body, their sense of purpose? Or is what we are asking, how do we get kids to do what we want them to do? Because I think, unfortunately, sometimes it's the latter. And that's not really what motivation means. If we truly think about wanting to motivate someone, it's connecting them with what it is that is naturally important and interesting to them, and not so much trying to convince them to do something that they are less interested in. And so, we can't push all square pegs through round holes. We have to be, attentive to the differences between kids. And one of the things that really seems to make a big difference for boys is when there is a sense of urgency and necessity. When things really have to happen and there's a certain time frame. I can recall at one point, Marianne, I was discussing this topic with a group of boys in South Africa. And I said to the boys in this group, I said, how many of you guys would be interested in doing something that was somewhat altruistic in your life? Working to help other people. And there was kind of a half-hearted showing of hands. Some boys said things like, well, if I could live in California, I might do some work like that. But then I kind of rephrased the question, and I said it this way. What if the head of your school came in here and said that 6 boys from this school were needed to go downtown immediately to help with an emerging situation? You guys would not be home until it was after dark, and you better be prepared to work hard. Some of you might get your clothes soiled. There might be some foul language used, and you still have to be on time for school the next morning. How many would help? And every hand in the room immediately shoots up. And so what is the message there? It's the message that where there is urgency and necessity, where boys themselves feel truly needed, that they will rise to the occasion, but sometimes we have to recognize that kind of, the importance of that adrenaline response and that how effective that is in kind of getting their motivation to come to the surface.
I'm so glad that you shared that with us. What a profound story. I think it can really resonate with a lot of not just parents, but educators as well. And they should all pick up their own copy of Cracking the Boy Code. Dr. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, it was a real pleasure to be with you, and I am easy to connect with. My website is Dr. Adam Cox, DRADAMCOX.com, and so anybody that wants to email me can email me there. I have a newsletter called Family Matters that discusses these things in great detail, and then the book is widely available in bookstores and online.
Thank you, Dr. Cox. It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and we really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insights in regards to young boys and, of course, your book, Cracking the Boy Code. Again, if you'd like to visit Dr. Cox's website, you can at dradamcox.com. His book, Cracking the Boy Code, is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all major retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.